All right. Welcome to New to Hill Country. We're here today with Matt Thornton, the president of SBG International. If you've been listening to the show for any amount of time, you know that the main sponsor of the podcast is SBG Texas, of which I am the co-owner with my wife, Kaylee. And we're going to talk to Matt Thornton today and learn everything we can about kind of the history of SBG and kind of put some context into how New to Hill Country came about. We've just been in Hill Country for the last year, and Matt was very instrumental in me opening the gym and moving everything in this direction. So welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Happy to be here, Michael. Thanks for having me.
So, Matt, since we normally start off with New to Hill Country talking about Hill Country, have you been to Texas? And more specifically, have you been to Hill Country, which is the kind of area between San Antonio and Austin and all that?
Yeah, no, that's actually kind of a funny story. I've been to Texas many, many times if you count the airport.
Okay.
If you don't count the airport, it's one of the few states actually I have not spent time in. So
Really?
no.
Oh, okay, interesting. Well, you'll have to get. Well, my goal is to get you down here. I don't know yet if 2021 is the year. I think it's so early in 2021 that we don't know what to expect from 2021 yet. But after 2020, I think everyone's a little gun shy to make too many proclamations. But eventually we'll get you down here, and I think you'll like it.
Absolutely.
We had Travis Davison, the VP of SBG down here, and I think he really liked it. So, so let's launch into it then. Just, for the listeners, could you talk a little bit about just how did SBG get started? What was your beginnings in martial arts, and how did everything grow to where it is now?
Sure. I did a little bit of karate when I was a kid, not, maybe a year, and then kind of quit that. That was more of a traditional karate when I was like 8 or 9. But I have a lifelong fascination with martial arts. And as I grew up, I became, and been into my teenage years and beyond, I became really fascinated by what works in a fight and what doesn't work. Just that specific question.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a little boxing and went into the military. When I got out of the military, I had decided that I was going to try and find an instructor in what's called Jeet Kune Do concepts, which was Bruce Lee's kind of fighting philosophy. And my reason was he talked about fighting at all the different ranges, what they called kicking, punching,
Mm-hmm.
trapping, grappling.
Mm-hmm.
And they use boxing hands. So I figured I'd have my boxing stand-up skills, but I also knew I needed to learn how to fight on the ground because I'd been in a couple of fights where I'd just been taken down to the ground by a wrestler, a grappler, and your boxing doesn't work at all down there.
Right.
So I started training Jeet Kune Do concepts. I became an instructor in that. I moved up to Portland, Oregon, and looked for another instructor. There was nobody that had a commercial school here that taught that, and this was in the very late 80s, very early 90s. So this was prior to the UFC or any of that stuff.
Wow.
And then I eventually befriended Dan and Asano instructor, and we opened up a school together where I did most of the instruction, and then he would do some of the Kali, and I would do a lot of the kickboxing and the Muay Thai. I had one class a week, which was all sparring, which was my own class, which was Friday nights.
Mm-hmm.
And over the course of about a year and a half where I was at that school, I ran into all the different Jeet Kune Do instructors. I got to meet Dan and Asano several times, trained with most of the different full instructors, and I became very disillusioned with that art. I didn't really feel like they were motivated by the same goal I was, which was still the same goal I had originally, which was wanting to know what works and what doesn't work in a fight. And some of what they did would be practical in terms of the boxing and the Muay Thai, and some of what they did would be just as absurd as a lot of the traditional martial arts that they themselves criticize. So I found that hypocritical.
Can I pause you there? I'm actually curious.
Yeah.
Could you give any examples of that? Like, what were they?
Sure. So
fixated with, sort of?
Yeah. So they'd have boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, which was all, good stuff that of course works. But the art that many of them were fixated on at the time, because really what they were interested in is whatever Dan and Asano was doing, was Penjak Silat.
Hmm.
And the Penjak Silat that they were doing, if I was going to design a martial arts system that would be less effective than Penjak Silat, it would be difficult for me to do. It was transparently absurd.
Oh, wow.
Um, and so it became clear to me, A, they don't really understand fighting, number one. And B, more to the point, I think that's not what motivates them. So they weren't
Mm-hmm.
really interested in the same kind of questions I was. And
Mm-hmm.
around that same time, as I was starting to become disillusioned through circumstance, I happened to run into Fabio Santos, who was a black belt under Holes and Hickson Gracie. And he just happened to be living up here, building boats as a job. And
Huh.
about a year before the UFC,
Yeah.
12 months or so, Horian called him and said, I'm going to have a job for you in a year. I have a big event coming up, and there's going to be a lot of students, and so get in shape. And so Fabio's way of getting in shape was, this again, it's pre-internet. So he put a little classified ad in the newspaper saying he would pay $50 to anybody that could come beat him up. And I was paying, $5 a week or whatever it was to get beat up 5 days a week at the Pro-Am boxing gym here. And I'm
Mhm.
like, I'm getting paid to get beat up every day. I'll go get $50 to get beat up. I'll go down there.
Sure.
And of course, it looked like the first UFC. Fabio was a smaller guy. I think even at that time, he must have been 40, 41. I was a young
Mhm.
20-something-year-old, 23, 24-year-old boxer, who was a heavyweight. And he just took me down and,
Mhm.
mounted me and finished real easily.
Mhm.
I was amazed. That was like magic. That's what I needed to do. And I immediately asked him for lessons.
Can I
And
can I
yeah,
pause you just for a second?
absolutely.
Like, because these people don't know you and haven't met you. Just for so you guys know, Matt is about you're what 6'7", 6'8"?
Yeah, I'm about 6'8". And at that time,
Okay.
I'm quite a bit heavier now, but at that time I would have been
Yeah.
probably 220,
So,
225.
so Matt is like a kind of giant, and so I think you kind of picture this guy like taking him down and just submitting him. Like, I think video footage in this case would really do it justice. Whereas, like,
Yeah,
I think what you just
unfortunately,
heard may not really like translate in your mind. Like, oh, two guys fought and one guy beat the other guy with jiu-jitsu. But it's like, I have a feeling that guy's pretty much everyone's smaller than you in general. So like
yeah.
that's a general assumption that's true. So
No,
yeah,
Professor
that's awesome.
Fabio is probably 150 pounds, just to put context to 160 maybe. He's kind of a skinny, older guy.
Mm, mm,
And to be clear, he didn't hurt me. I mean, he
that's
just took me
awesome.
down, controlled me, and then finished with a submission. I don't think he ever even punched me in the face.
Mm,
Um, and if somebody wants to see what that looked like, I would just say go rent or watch on the internet the first or one or two UFCs and watch what Hoist did. And it was basically the same
right.
thing, kind of stomp
Right.
kick, body lock, takedown, mount,
Mm, mm,
rear naked choke, triangle, armbar type stuff.
mm,
But I was around that same time after I had trained with Fabio, I got an opportunity to meet Hickson Gracie, and a friend of mine who was also part of the Jeet Kune Do world had brought him into a seminar about 90 minutes from Portland.
mm,
And I showed up, and when I showed up late, and when I got there, it was filled with some Jeet Kune Do guys, and then some judo guys had showed up,
mm.
and they were judo black belts, kind of big grappler guys. And I was watching Hickson roll with one after the other, what we call Iron Manning, where you just roll with one person after another in a row, beat them rather easily.
Oh,
And I realized after I was sitting there for a few minutes that Hickson wasn't using his hands. They were using whatever, but he was just using his legs, and he was submitting them without actually, his hands were in his belt.
Jesus.
And then he called me out and he said, "For you, I'll take one hand out." He didn't need to, but he took one hand out. And, I jumped on him, and he armbarred me, probably 90 seconds later, and I was it. This is what I've been looking for, and I
Right.
became a student of Hickson. I had Hickson come up and train. I had the opportunity where he came up and stayed with me for about a week one time up here.
Mm,
But after that, I went back and tried to tell the guys at the school I was training at what had happened and what I had seen, and like, this is what we're looking for.
Mm,
And they weren't interested. I mean,
that's
they were more interested in the C lot, the clicking the sticks together. And I realized I just have to do my own thing. And that was the start of SBG. And so I went and opened up my first tiny school, which I split rent with a judo guy who was a friend of mine. And that was the first SBG. And that would have been around 1992
mm.
when I opened. And so we've been going strong ever since.
Wow. When you came back and you were telling them about what Rickson had done,
Yeah.
I really always find that kind of interesting. And obviously, running SBG Texas, like, we do get some folks that come in who they'll start talking about a traditional martial art that they've done or something, and you can see that we're just clearly not talking about the same thing, and
Right.
they often feel that they're talking about the same thing, but like, I can tell that they believe they're talking about the same thing, whereas as I'm listening to them, I'm fully cognizant of the fact that you're generally they'll be talking about, like, a gentleman came in our gym one day to try to sell us on, like, I don't know, air conditioner repair or something like that, and then he was doing his best to be something of a salesman and form connection, and he was saying that he had done, I think it was like a Jeet Kune Do kind of thing. I think he claimed to have trained with Ip Man, Bruce Lee's legendary teacher or something like
Wow,
that.
he's going
Which,
way back. He must have been pretty old.
well, that's the thing. The guy, I'm looking at this guy and he's like maybe 35, and I'm like, so what'd you do? Train with someone who was like 90 and on his deathbed? Like, it just all
Right.
sounded totally like, absurd. And then he told me how in a demonstration he broke his foot kicking the floor, and seemed really proud of that. Like, I'd kicked the
Yeah.
floor so hard that I broke my foot, and I was kind of, and that's where I was like, you get it. Like, there's just that disconnect of, like, we're really not
Yeah.
talking about the same thing. Like,
Right.
even just hitting the floor is like, that's not even really a technique. I mean, any geek off the street can stomp someone on the head. Like, that's not like I don't feel like that's a technique you really have to train with any
Right.
great significance. So, and then you just broke your foot doing it.
Right.
So I don't know what did the training provide you except force that you couldn't control, I guess. Like, I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, so yeah, just stuff like that, those kinds of weird conversations. And I have, and I'm sorry, I'm going on a bit, but I know that a lot of people have, like, what you could call, like, a friend of mine calls it the self-defense fantasy,
Yeah.
which is where you train self-defense, and even if it's legit, and then you almost, like, there are people who almost like hope that someone will attack them so they can
Yeah.
use it or something. I don't have it. My only self-defense fantasy is when I talk to someone like that guy is I just want to take him to the mat, like a safe mat. And I
Yeah.
just want to, like, okay, let's just go. And I want to take him down and just make him realize the absurdity of what he's talking about. Kind of like, those are the only people I ever even get. And it's not really even like I want to hurt them. It's more just like, I just want to see their face when it all
Right.
happens, kind of, like I
Yeah.
don't want to, like, ground and pound them or something like that. I've had people a couple times, would happen in Korea too, where someone was like telling me about something they do, and I just think, like, oh, I almost just want to, like, double leg you right here in this dinner party, and just,
Right.
like, just to see the look on your face when you realize that all that stuff you just talked about is totally meaningless in the
Right.
face of, like, real martial arts. But yeah, but I digress. So you guys got going in 1992,
Yeah.
and what was it like in the early days? Like, what kind of, I mean, I know it's like we're still dealing with people who, there's still a great many people who don't know the reality of how certain martial arts actually work, and many don't,
Right.
like, but in 92, I would figure you'd be still getting a lot of death touch type stuff and all that kind of weirdness
Yeah.
coming
We
in.
got a bit of that. So that was the beginning. That was the very beginning of MMA, the
Mm-hmm.
MMA era,
Mm-hmm.
and we'd have people that would come in and want to do challenge matches or whatever on occasion. So we got a little bit of that, but that slowly started to disappear,
Mm-hmm.
and events started to occur primarily up Portland, where I live, is located right on the border of Washington State. It's
Mm-hmm.
literally a 10-minute drive across the river. And
Mm-hmm.
Oregon for years had a ban on boxing and MMA when MMA started. They didn't allow any of that because they had a boxing wrestling commission, which was run by a guy who was corrupt and just didn't want to ever have to do anything. So no matter what you proposed for boxing or for professional wrestling or anything like that, he'd turn it down. And so there was no events, but we could go across the river and they would have what they call pancration or some beginning MMA events, primarily put on by Matt Hume, who was one of the real pioneers of MMA in the Pacific Northwest. Matt had been fighting in Japan for a very long time.
Sure.
So my guys would go there. I started a fight team, and we would go there, and they would fight MMA. And there was more of that than there was. There was no such thing as a Jiu Jitsu tournament. The first real Jiu Jitsu tournament in Oregon would have been put on by us, and later became what we called the sub league. But yeah, no, we got a little bit of it when we first started, and slowly over time our training methods evolved and became smarter and became something where now, as you know, the goal is to be able to make it accessible to anybody, no matter what their athletic background is. Back then, it would have been more of a meat grinder when people came into class. You had to basically survive.
No, I can imagine that pretty easily. I mean, I feel like when I started jiu-jitsu in Korea, I've talked about this with you, I think, but like, you know, John Frankel, my coach, it was just, there were just mats, you know, at a university. And, you know, we would meet there and John would show up maybe once a month. I mean, maybe that's just when I came. I saw him maybe once or twice a month. It was a good while before I met John. I really instantly liked him. I think we got along really well straight from the beginning. But you know, it was a grinder. Like it was kind of a couple minutes of teach a technique, and then it's just like, hey, let's get after this, and we just start rolling. And most everybody there was a purple belt already, and like a tournament winning purple belt on top of it, and they were, you know, guys that had already had a pretty long experience in like Muay Thai or Hapkido or something else, and they were killers. And it was fun. I mean, but not really the kind of atmosphere that I try to create at my gym for sure. And I think, it's
evolved.
Yeah, right. We just got smarter about it. I mean, there were so many guys that just show up one time, get their butt whooped, and just leave, you know, and never see them again. And they never learned to love it or never learned to see what was even going on. And before I have another question for you, but I do have a fun thing to add. I think it was just 2 nights ago. I was with my wife, Kaylee, and she, you know, all this stuff's fairly new to her. And I showed her UFC 1, which the total fights is like, you can watch it in like 10 minutes or something. I think the fights overall were really pretty short. And you know, I'm still introducing her to some of these things. And I think the first fight is like a guy who claims kind of like a kickboxing background. The other guy's like a karate background. And they start fighting. And just, I like Kaylee. Obviously I like Kaylee. I married her. But, you know, she's watching the karate guy and she goes like, which guy's the karate guy? And I'm like, that guy's the karate guy. And she goes, oh, so he pretty much doesn't use karate. He's and it's like, you know, it's such a simple statement, but I was like, you see it so clearly right there. It's like, he's like, makes a big deal about he's a karate guy. As soon as it starts fighting, he looks just like a kickboxing guy, and you don't see any of the stance. You don't see any of the stuff. It all dissolves as people start moving and getting hit. And, you know, he's trying to ground and pound, and he's just, he looks nothing like, if I didn't know he was a karate guy, there's nothing you would have seen in that fight that would have even remotely suggested that to anyone.
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. One thing I think the early UFCs really showed us, and, you know, I used to say it about when people would ask these questions about this style or that style, is that if you put 2 traditional martial artists in the cage, and it doesn't matter who they are, a Wing Chun guy versus a Tai Chi guy, or a Kung Fu guy versus a Shotokan guy, within a few seconds, it's going to look like 2 guys trying to do MMA who don't know how to do MMA.
Exactly. No,
that's all it looks like. And if you put an MMA athlete in with one of those guys, it's not a sport anymore. It's just a beating.
Right. Yeah, no, that's. Have you ever seen the guy Mad Dog over in China?
Is that the guy that's been taking on the Kung Fu guys?
Yeah, he challenges the Tai Chi guys. And I think they're pulling his videos off of YouTube. I think China is pressuring YouTube to remove those, because I was trying to look for him to show him the other day to someone. And I know he's been getting kind of censored and stuff, but those are hilarious because the Tai Chi guys, if they score any shots, it's totally just like schoolyard left hook or something.
Yeah.
Like, it's like as they start getting just beat up, and he'll be punching them with one hand behind his back, and then they'll switch to like, suddenly they start throwing jabs and stuff like that. And they'll even get like a smile on their face, like, because they'll land a punch like, see, I can do it. And it's like, yeah, but now you're not doing Tai Chi at all.
Right.
Exactly. At all. Like, and it just, he proves the point so dramatically. But yeah, it's fun stuff. That's always that's my guilty pleasure, is like watching traditional martial artists get beat up by real martial artists on YouTube.
It was I will admit it's entertaining to watch for sure.
No, it is. Yeah, I'll watch it's called like, what is it, Street Beefs or something? I'll watch Street Beefs, which is like really like backyard MMA stuff, and you see the guy that comes out like, I'm Rising Phoenix and I'm here to represent, some traditional thing, and he'll just get like knocked out in like 20 seconds or something. And I take a little bit of guilty pleasure in it all. But what can you do? So well, cool. As you guys were going along, like, I know kind of somewhere in the early days, Randy Couture came to kind of train with you and stuff like that. Could you talk about that a little bit? Like, how did that happen? And, what was
Sure. Randy lived in Corvallis, Oregon, which is about 90 minutes south of Portland.
Mm-hmm.
And within about 2 years, maybe even less than that, I'd opened up a second gym. I had, when I started, all my friends in Jeet Kune Do told me it wasn't going to work. A very cynical view that nobody wants to train this way. People want certificates. They want to click sticks together. You're never going to make any money. And that it was basically projection, of course, but that was the theory. Mm-hmm. And I kind of accepted that be the case, and I was going to have a second job, but I'm not going to teach bullshit martial arts to make money. Right. And in reality, it turned out to be the opposite, of course. There was a whole bunch of people who were interested in doing exactly what I was doing. And I realized pretty quickly that I needed to open up a second spot. So I opened up one in Salem, which is kind of halfway between here and Corvallis. And around that time, Randy, if you guys remember, the early UFCs, they were tournament style. So you had to win like 3 fights in a row.
Right.
And Randy was what you call an alternate. So if somebody got hurt, he could step in. And he was an Olympic level wrestler. I don't think he'd ever made it I'm not sure if he'd made it to the Olympics or not, but he'd come real close. He was a Greco specialist. He'd had no submission, no boxing, just pure wrestling. But he watched the UFC one day, like UFC 1 or 2, and said, hey, I can do that. So he signed up. He was an alternate. The guy that was winning the UFC was injured, so he got to step in as in his place. And I think he won 2 fights, if I remember correctly, and became the champion. So here he was, the UFC champion, and had no submissions, had no boxing. And his next fight was set to be against Vitor Belfort, who was making big waves at the time, knocking people out. And at the time was advertising himself as Vitor Gracie. So Randy, one of my students knew Randy and said, hey, I know, I might have even been a blue belt, but I think I'm probably a purple belt at this time. I'm not sure, somewhere around there. He said, hey, I know a purple belt in Jiu Jitsu who, does boxing, and he brought him down to my gym. And Randy walked in the door, and we rolled and trained, and so from that day until the fight, he basically trained 5 days a week at my school, and did that for a couple of years. And I trained him for the Vitor Belfort fight, I was much more worried about Vitor's jiu-jitsu than I should have been, because to me, I still had a view of Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belts as Rickson, because my exposure had been through Rickson, and the skill discrepancy between, nothing against Vitor, he's a tough guy, but the jiu-jitsu skill discrepancy between Vitor Belfort and Rickson Gracie, it's like Michael Jordan versus a high school basketball player.
Right.
But I did not know that at the time. So our goal was to keep Randy standing. And then the second goal was to not have him get knocked out by Vitor's boxing blast, because Vitor had been running into people and just knocking him unconscious within the first couple seconds.
Right.
And Vitor's a southpaw. So what I did was I had Randy hold his elbow up high up against his head. So he's hugging the side of his head with his arm, so that if Vitor had run in throwing the boxing blast, he would have been punching into Randy's elbow. And so that means he had to get a little bit closer so that Randy could then grab him.
I see.
So that was our strategy. And anyway, if you guys remember the fight, that's where people, I think, for the first time got a good opportunity to see what Greco-Roman can do, what somebody who's a true black belt in the clinch can do. And Randy just beat the crap out of him up against the fence and just basically wore him down with underhooks and boxing. And then the second fight, which we trained for as well at that same gym, was against Maurice Smith. And with Maurice Smith, we had the opposite strategy of, we want to get Maurice down on his back right away, because Maurice is a very good kickboxer.
I see.
And so for that particular fight, all I did was basically throw punches at Randy and try and hit him while he tried to take me down. I wound up tearing my ACL on that one. But I also realized for the first time ever just how good and how dangerous wrestler Randy's level is, because it was impossible for me to stop him from taking me down over and over and over and over and over again.
Wow.
So anyway, that was Randy. And then around that time, he introduced me to his friend, Dan Henderson, who wanted to get in fights. And Dan came and trained, and Dan came and trained for his first UFC, and then entered in Hawaii and wound up winning a tournament.
Nice.
And yeah, those are the early years of SBG here in Oregon.
What's I'd like to hear about Dan too, but what's Randy like as a person? So, like, I'm sure you guys got a
super
beer
nice
here
guy. I got along great with Randy from right off the bat. Super humble, super nice, open-minded, wanted to learn everything, would put the gi on and roll with me.
Okay.
Would listen, super coachable. He's everything you'd want in a fighter or a student. And there's a lot of people a lot of guys in particular who will take MMA fights for the wrong reason. And you may want to corner them anyway, at least once, so they can get it out of their system. Okay. But when that happens, it's kind of a bummer. At least it is for me. It's not a pleasurable experience. I don't like being there with them, because I can see how stressed out they are and how basically unpleasant the experience is up until it's over. But with somebody like Randy, it's just the opposite. He was a natural competitor. He loved to compete. He loved to fight. He had the smile you would see on his face when he was in the cage was legit. He wanted to be in there doing that. And when you get somebody like that, then it's a real honor to be part of their camp in any way. Connor's the same way. It's in their blood. That's what they want to do. And every once in a while, you'll get somebody that's exactly what they are. They're a fighter. And Dan is the same way. Dan's a little, the thing I noticed about Dan is where Randy was fairly relaxed and equally skilled, I think, in the clinch, and then started to learn boxing and very rapidly became very skilled in jiu-jitsu. Dan was one of those guys where his clinch was super relaxed and super technical. In some ways, I felt like Henderson's clinch was even more relaxed maybe than Randy's. But on the ground, he was just like, he would rip your head off. It's like,
wow.
Massive power, super strong, much stronger than deceptively strong based on what he looked like. And had a natural overhand right that was just a monster overhand right. The first time I ever held gloves for him, it was literally, this is a jab, this is a cross. That was his level of boxing. I had to like tell him which one was which and how to stand.
Mm-hmm.
And then he threw a right hand into the focus mitt and almost knocked my shoulder off. And then I was just born with the talent to be able to throw that punch.
Wow. I mean, I've seen him knock people out on the screen, and it looks like the nastiest overhand right.
The average human being that gets hit by that overhand right is going to go unconscious no matter what. So you have to be particular genetically gifted not to get knocked out when you get hit by that.
Like that first fight with Michael Bisping, that's one of those punches where it's like it almost murdered him. You know what I mean? Like he just falls like a tree, and you're like, oh my God. And then the ref stupidly isn't stepping in fast enough, so like Henderson gets that extra shot in from like jumping on him, and it's like, oh my God, get on it, ref. You know, I mean, I'm not trying to be. I haven't reffed MMA, so I'm sure it's hard to know when to pop in and stuff. But yeah, easy to armchair that type of thing. But it just looks like that ref needs to be in there. Maybe he was yelling. You can't hear it on the screen, but like it was so devastating when it hit him. Oh man. Like, so yeah, it just felt like he was going to break your shoulder with like the pads.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Right away. So that's just naturally gifted that way, I guess.
Oh, that's crazy. Huh. That's crazy. Huh. And, like from those guys on, like the gym started, the gym was growing. Like, I'm kind of curious, and this is just, I guess, a question as a gym owner, but having those guys in the gym, did that bring people in or did that scare people away? I don't know.
They didn't scare anybody away because they had their own separate training times, but it didn't really bring anybody in. So, what Randy brought to SBG was the clinch.
I see.
So I felt like up to the point where I met Randy, I felt like we had two pieces of the puzzle. We had stand up, we had solid boxing and kickboxing skills, and we had jiu-jitsu. And I got good jiu-jitsu early on because I came through Hickson.
Right.
But we didn't really, my clinch, the extent of my clinch was the little bit I had from Muay Thai.
Nice to see.
And so what Randy brought in was he brought in all the pieces of the clinch, all the different positional, overhook, underhook, 2-on-1, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And really filled in the gaps on our curriculum so that we had all the different pieces. But from, the time I opened, I rapidly expanded to probably 100, 150 students.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept that. I would alternate between 180 to 150 students every year for the next 10 years of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I'd build it up to like 150, but then I started to do a lot of seminars. I got to the point where I was doing 12 or 15 seminars a year because we opened up different schools around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And when I would leave and someone else I was normally teaching all the classes, I would leave, one of my other purple belts or somebody would come in and take over for me. And no matter how good of a coach they were, retention would go down because people get attached to a particular coach.
Sure.
And so I always had a core of like 100 people, 80 people who no matter what were going to be there. They're going to train and they're going to pay.
Mm-hmm.
And it was enough combined with my seminar income and money I made from videos and things like that my wife at the time didn't have to work and I could raise my kids and I could do it for a living.
Mm-hmm.
But it was always paycheck to paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Salome and I decided, my wife now decided we were going to have children, and this would have been 12 years ago, 13 years ago, I did not want to have to worry about money anymore. And so at that point, I started to really think about the business aspect of what we were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that for the previous 12 years, whatever, I had been weeding way more people out than I should have been because I had not created a system where we could build them up over time. If you came to the gym and you weren't already mentally strong enough to withstand, getting smashed and crushed the first year, you were going to quit. And so there was a whole bunch of people who really could have used jiu-jitsu and needed jiu-jitsu that never got it because they got weeded out. So I kind of reversed that process. I basically, first of all, I learned what the good mechanics of the business are. So you have your marketing and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of the retention aspect, I reversed the process so that we can take someone who's maybe had a desk job for the last 12 or 13 years and didn't wrestle in high school,
Mm.
but really wants to learn jiu-jitsu, and we can build them up and make them solid and not lose them. And so then we got to, I started to work on that, like I said, about 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And for the last 4 or 5 years, I've had a student base now that's closer to 500. So even right now, with a year of COVID, we still have over 500 members at our Portland gym.
Mm-hmm.
So lesson learned, there's a right way and a wrong way to run the business, and
Sure.
and really our goal should be building up weak people, not just making strong people stronger.
Right. No,
But
totally.
the first 10 or 12 years, I ran my gym like an MMA school, and to be honest, the first 10 years, I didn't start teaching martial arts because I wanted to teach martial arts. I started teaching martial arts because I wanted training partners. So the first 8 to 10 years I was in business, I used all my students as training partners. They were there to help me get better, so they were sparring partners for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I really started to take the coaching and the teaching and everything much, much more serious about 15 to 16 years ago. And this paid off in dividends in terms of the volume of people we now have, which I'm happy about.
Totally. No, I feel like in SBG Texas, we've been able to apply that model and everything that you've shared and everything that you guys have made great. And I think we're not quite at a year anniversary. I think I saw my numbers the other day. I try not to put my mind on the numbers too much because I just kind of try to focus on just delivering, and doing the right thing, and kind of, because you're going to have someone who leaves town, and you're going to have someone who, just for whatever reason can't train or something like it. And
Sure.
I just try not to let that affect me or whatever. But I think we topped, I want to say 112. I mean, this week we may have even gotten up to 120 this week. I don't know. We actually had a really good week. So, and that's less than a year, and in a pandemic, and luckily in Texas, where we have, we're not like on the super ultra lockdown that a lot of other states are on. So we've been very fortunate in that regard. So I mean, I feel like it works, like it totally works. And just I like what you're saying about I totally understand what you're saying about the, like, using the students as training partners, because I have a lot of experience with different gyms in Korea, because John Frankel has just grown so many gyms in Korea at this point, and they're just jiu-jitsu gyms everywhere. But John doesn't run those gyms. Like, people get black belts from him, and then they run the gym. It's their gym. They do it however they want. And I love a lot of those guys. A lot of those people are really good friends of mine, but they have that tendency to basically be using the students as their own training partners, more so like they're getting ready for their tournament, kind of like. And I really try to make, like, the model of my class, look what you can do, not look what I can do. And like, sometimes I'll write at the end of class or something, I'll say, like, especially in, like, our foundation stuff, I'll say, we don't have time to get into this, but here are some things that are possible off of here. Later we'll try to address these things, but this is a little, and I'll literally use the expression, this is a little bit of look what I can do. But, this is, just a preview of what is possible, just to kind of open your mind up to possibilities. We just don't have time to cover it. I just don't want you to think that this is the end of the road here or something, so, and so just kind of give them a little extra education sometimes. But I love it. I really never get, it's interesting. I don't really feel like I work in some sense. So it's, I don't know. The admin stuff is more work than, once it's like gym time, it's just, I'm in class time. I'm in my playground, really. Like, like, I'm in such a good mood during all of that. So
which is how it should be, right?
Right. Yeah. It's a great, it's been a great year for me. I'm kind of curious, just kind of reversing it on the other end. I know what it was like to meet you in Portland. What was it like to meet me when I came in? Like, because we met, this would have been about 2 years ago. Whatever you want to say on the other end of that, I'm just kind of curious I don't know how I come off, or, what impression I give. And I rarely get a chance to ask someone something like this, and I don't usually think to, but it occurs to me now. So,
the impression I got when you were here, based on the volume of questions you were asking, was that this was something that you were, the gym and opening it was something you were taking very seriously. And not something you were taking lightly. And if you were going to do it, you wanted to make sure you did it the right way. All of which I think is great. So I was happy to see that. And the bottom line, and I think I even probably said this to John after you left, was, and Travis, is, I have no doubt that you're going to go down there and you guys are going to do great. So, you can kind of tell. It's interesting. It's the same thing with Jiu Jitsu students, but I asked Kavanaugh a year or two ago, what is the thing he's really looking for, which is a question I get asked a lot as well. But in his case, he's going to get asked a lot about it from the standpoint of professional athletics, which is, what is it you're looking for when you find the next Conor McGregor, or the next guy that you think can be an MMA champion? And the answer he gave is the same answer that I would give if somebody asked me what I was looking for if I was finding the next person who could be a very successful coach. And the answer is, they ask good questions. If it's the type of person who says to me, well, just tell me exactly how I have to do it and I'll go do it, they could be successful if they implement, because implementation is a massive part of it. But if it's clear that they're not putting any thought behind it, that they don't want to put any thought behind it, if somebody doesn't want to put forth the effort to think of good questions, how much effort are they really going to put forward when it comes time to implementation?
Right.
So, I think that would have been my biggest impression.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's good. Yeah, I'm kind of curious if I just come off as, because for me, I felt on my end kind of like, John had made an introduction and everything, and I was coming in, didn't know each other, and I'm talking about opening, a gym and all with your name and everything. So I don't know. I just always kind of think of myself as kind of just this sort of lanky Iowa boy, who spent a little too much time in Asia, if anything, sort of. So it's, I'm always like, I don't know. I have no idea how I come off to people usually. So,
John's, Frankel's recommendation is going to carry a lot of weight, but, like I said, you were asking good questions and had put a lot of thought into it. I had a similar experience when John Boone came up. So he brought his wife, and they stayed for about a week, and he asked a lot of questions. We went out to eat. He asked a lot of questions, and I could tell, right away, he's gonna do well because he's thoughtful.
Right. I like John Boone a lot. We hit it off at Niagara a couple of years back or whatever. Like, great guy. Just whipped my butt on the mat, but it's like he just totally, but super smooth and not like rough or anything, but he just tore me apart basically. Like, I think I held him in close guard for like a few seconds, and like later he was really gracious and was sort of like, man, it's still really hard to get caught in a good close guard. And I was like, yeah, I guess, like, I think I had you there for maybe 5-6 seconds tops or something, but like, yeah, he was just shredding my open guard at the time. So it was
he's very, very technical, and he's used to working with a lot of killers down there in California. So.
Oh yeah, totally. Wow, cool. That's a really cool dude. Yeah. What do you see as the future for SBG? Like, what are the future goals that you have in mind for like SBG International, and just like, where do you see things going?
Yeah, I've never operated the organization in terms of goals, because for a number of different reasons, but primarily because I've always wanted the growth to be organic, right? So
Mm-hmm.
figure the right people will find us, and they do, and we occasionally take on new people like John Boone, as we just talked about, who didn't come up
Mm-hmm.
through SBG.
Mm-hmm.
But if we never took another person into the organization from outside, there's so many black belts now. I have, I think more than 30 of my own that I've given out. And
Wow.
then now my black belts have black belts, and
Mm-hmm.
that it's inevitable. There's a kind of, exponential growth rate, and we're going to have lots and lots and lots of coaches. So, and I think Travis and I and the other instructors, Steve Whittier and others,
Mm-hmm.
have put together the business plan in such a way that any of them, if they decide, hey, this is what I want to do for a living, are going to be able to do it and be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the next 10 years is going to continue to see that. There's going to be a lot of really great schools, but it's never the type of thing where I never have a goal like I want to open up this many schools by this time period, because it doesn't operate like a franchise in that sense.
Right.
And so I'm just looking forward to seeing the new coaches come through and seeing the new locations that will pop up organically over the next 10 years, and watching everybody, continue to be successful.
Yeah. So that totally makes sense to me. Wow. You have like 30 black belts you figure now? Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, I'd have to count, but I think so. But I mean, I've been a black belt now since 2001, I think.
Oh, wow.
So 19 years. So 19 years of and I was training 10 years before that. So I've got 30 years about it doing jiu-jitsu.
Right.
So I've had a lot of students and a lot of people come through the door. But and I think John now probably has, Kavanaugh probably has a dozen, and Travis probably has half a dozen. So it happens pretty quickly. You'll have a crop of, it seems like a lot, but in 5 or 6 years you'll have 10 or 12 brown belts, and then 3 years later you're going to have 6 black belts yourself. It's just how it works.
Right. Yeah, no, I can see it going that way. Yeah, John Frankel's got like, I don't even know. It's a lot.
I think we're around the same. Yeah, he's got at least 30, I think.
I mean, and then there are guys that want John to christen the black belt. It's like a black belt of John's, and they want him to kind of. So he and I would talk about that sometimes. Some guys, he's like, how did he get all the way to black belt and we've never met? Sort of, like, shouldn't that have happened before? Now you want me to give him a black belt? I think I'll pass on that one. Like, kind of. So. But yeah, there's definitely some interesting, not exactly intrigue, but just there's so many gyms over in Korea now. It's crazy. I'd like to see more of the Korean gyms, especially a couple of the coaches who speak English better. This is what I was saying before I left. Actually, I was suggesting to a number of them that they need to come to Portland or come to Oregon or come to like Montana and like learn more of the business systems. Like to be able to deliver on things in a more efficient way, because they're just not getting it there. I mean, some of them are doing well, but there's just, I think when they got going, they had jiu-jitsu, which jiu-jitsu itself is just such an amazing and fun and just incredible product that it sort of sells itself once people see it. But what's happening to some of my friends that are gym owners there is now it's like the exclusivity is going down. It's like they've got jiu-jitsu, but now there's a place across the street. In Seoul, you've got 25 million people. So, there's just jiu-jitsu gyms popping. It's the fastest growing sport in Korea. And those gyms are just popping. And, doing it crudely matters, because now you're competing for like some attention span there. And I don't know. They're my friends, and I just want to see them do well. So I don't know. But they tend to not. I don't know. They tend to not want to invest much, and so that's part of the problem. They want to do it as bare bones as possible, and they get bare bones results. So it's I can't control their lives. So
no.
So, maybe eventually we'll get that going. I don't know. I think it's a shame that you and Travis couldn't make it over there in 2020 like you guys were planning.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, we were all set until the COVID hit, but I'm sure we'll get over there at some point. And eventually, competition will force them to pay a little more attention to
right.
that kind of stuff than they
I
might be
think
doing
so.
now.
I think
And
so.
then, not everybody will be able to run a good business, primarily because it's very hard to get people to change to change, to do things different from how they've been doing them.
Sure.
So if they've been running a gym a particular way for, I don't know, 12 years, trying to say, hey, if you do this, you'll get much better results. There's some people that are just actually incapable of doing that. They'll just go back to how they did it before. And then ultimately one or two of them will. And as soon as somebody does, and then they get way more results, everybody else around them will see that, and it'll kind of snowball and a change will happen.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I could probably make you a short list of who I know, like guys that I know can do it and guys who I know could not. Like, I could pick it out just super easy. And there's like 2-3 people that come into my mind right away that, like, once they see it, they'll get it, they'll start doing it. And then the other guys might adapt later once they see the students falling out of the doors and everything. But yeah,
sure, that's pretty normal.
Yeah. So I don't know. Just want to see those guys. I just don't want to see them get swallowed up by other places that figure stuff out. So just there. A lot of these people were like at my wedding and stuff like that.
Sure.
Those are just my own little personal things, personal ghosts, sort of. But yeah. But anyways, great having you on, Matt. I really enjoyed the stories, and I think a lot of the people, particularly our gym members, will really like hearing about the genesis of everything. So, and can't wait to get you down to Texas, you and Salome, and that should be a lot of fun. So
yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. So hopefully sometime soon.
Okay. Well, take her easy, Matt, and hold tight up there in Portland. I know it ain't easy up there. So
thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
All right.